Marler, you will be gambling responsibly on the Sugar Bowl. Weird Sugar Bowl matchup. Really, really weird to have number 3 Texas, who, by the way, 4.5-point favorite against number 2 Washington in the semifinal matchup. That is on Monday, New Year's Day, 8:45 Eastern on ESPN. And I'm going to say that, look, we'll start with a little over-under. Over-under 9 o'clock. That game kicks off. Take the over.
Over. You might be able to take the over in Central Time Zone, Connor. It is like we were just talking this off air. The last time this setup was happening, right, was I believe 2017, and it was when it was Bama, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Clemson. Clemson was the 1 seed. Georgia OU was the 2 and 3 seed out in the Rose Bowl. That's like one of the greatest Rose Bowls of all time. It goes to double overtime, and that Sugar Bowl didn't start until probably 9:30. I don't think it's going to be as bad, mainly because that clock is going to be running a lot in the Rose Bowl.
Yes, probably will be. One would think. I don't think, and we'll get to some of the over-unders and just game flow in general with the as it relates to the Rose Bowl, but would be very surprised if we get scoring that rivals what we had with Oklahoma and Georgia in that game. As it relates to this game, over-under is 63.5. There's a lot. Big number for a playoff game. Consecutive years that these teams, Texas and Washington, are facing off in a bowl game, which does not happen very often. Last year, this was the Alamo Bowl. It was a game Washington won 27-20. A lot has changed since then. We are no longer talking about Sark as the guy that lost his mind on that poor security guard that made the unfortunate decision to put his hands on the Texas head coach. My God. Oh, gosh, chills. We are instead talking about potentially one of the all-time great redemption stories in college football history as a result of what he's done to get Texas to this point, to a college football playoff, possibly more. These teams are a combined 25-1 since facing off in San Antonio last year. Vegas believes that Texas should at least be favored to avenge that loss. How do you see this spread looking, knowing that Texas is a 4.5-point favorite, given all the things that have been said and written about the Longhorns this year?
So you hit on so many good points already. I love Sark, and you know that. As a guy, you can see the sign in the background as a big Bama guy. I think Sarkisian is the greatest offensive mind in all of football and at any level. I just think he's so creative, and he's so good at getting his playmakers the ball in creative ways too. When you talk about the over-under, right, we'll start there because it's at 63.5. So what you're basically saying in this game is, if Texas is favored by 4.5, Vegas is saying this is probably going to be like a 34-30 type game. Texas being favored, I think is interesting because I think by kickoff, you'll probably see both of the lower seed teams be the favorite in those from like a betting odds standpoint. I could be wrong with that. I just think it's just, it's probably what's going to end up happening. But Vegas setting the line here, it does a lot of things for me when I think of Texas. You brought up the fact they're 25-1 along with Washington since that rematch last year. That one loss came with 15 seconds to go in a rivalry game in a neutral site. So they are a very good team. The thing with Texas that I don't think people understand, just because it's such a surface level thing for college football fans to watch, is we talk about Texas, we talk about the offense, we talk about Quinn Ewers, we talk about Sarkisian, we talk about Jatavian Washington, we talk about or Jatavian Sanders. We talk about Xavier Worthy, we talk about A.D. Mitchell, all those things. That defense for the Longhorns is one of the most overlooked and underrated units, I think, in the entire country, to no fault of their own. It's just the fact that we talk about Texas the same way we talk about Washington, mainly with how good that offense can be. I think Texas should be favored. I don't know if I think that Texas is going to be ESPN just going off in the background here. I don't know if Texas is it like I don't know if this is going to be as high scoring of a game as people think on paper.
Interesting, because you're right about the Texas defense. They're 5th in the country against the run. They have been rock solid. If Texas is going to be back, it will be because of that run defense and what they've done in the trenches to be able to step up and look like a national championship type team. The comp for Washington is 2022 TCU. And if you're wondering why is Washington a 4.5-point underdog in this game, they're the team that has won 20 consecutive games. I mean, they have just been 7 in a row to end last season. Obviously 13-0 start. They get over I don't want to call it get over the Oregon hump, but they felt like they were doubted as the underdog in that
Yeah.
game in the rematch in the Pac-12 championship. But the comp for 2022 TCU makes a lot of sense. And it made sense coming into the season, knowing how many veterans they were going to have, not having those key losses to the NFL draft. And they have followed the TCU script this season. The last time that Washington played in a game decided by more than 10 points was September 23rd.
That's wild.
That was the first day of fall,
With that
right?
offense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is probably setting the stage. The fact that they have won 9 consecutive games by 10 points or less. That is, you could look at that in a couple of ways, right? Does that mean that they are just extremely comfortable playing in close games, like what TCU was last year when they run the fire drill against Baylor, and everybody's like, whoa, this team, just for whatever reason, they continue to find a way? Or does it mean that they are playing with fire and they will eventually suffer a fate similar to TCU, who ran into the buzzsaw that was Georgia and 65-7 happened? Which side do you lean more towards as it relates to Washington?
Well, Georgia's not in this playoff, so that I think is good for everybody. Because that is something I think that would be, because like you're right, like that is a buzzsaw. But it's funny that you brought that up, because that is the exact comp I was thinking, and I thought I was going to be the smart one to say it and be like, Connor, get this. No, it's a perfect example, and more so than anything, that TCU team last year. I remember joking around, like, what did they do to the committee? Because there was 4 straight weeks where they played ranked opponents, and they were an underdog in all 4 games, and they won. All they did was win throughout the entire year, and then they lose in a close one in the Big 12 championship game when all the hay was kind of in the barn for them to get to the playoff in the first place. That team was a really, really good team that was doubted all year long. Washington, not only were they doubted in a rematch in the game they won, they were a near double-digit underdog to Oregon, right? And all they've done is show up each week, and I think that people kind of discredit them. You heard the committee say this too. The committee kind of discredited them because it's like, oh, the way Oregon's winning. And it's like, all right, well, Washington, they're not winning by a bunch. And maybe you think they should because that offense is so prolific and high scoring, but like they're still winning every single week, and they're playing an arguably tougher schedule than Oregon. I tend to lean on the fact that I do feel like it's TCU, but I lean more on this has more of a potential team of destiny than a team of running into a buzzsaw. Like they're no one's getting beat in this playoff 65-7 for one. But I just feel like that. Why I would hope not. Maybe Michigan, hopefully. But I think that when you talk about Washington, man, they've done it in so many different ways, and that's the part that's like so incredible to me. Is we look at them a lot like Texas. They're passing the ball. Michael Penix Jr. and how great he's been, Heisman finalist, finished number 2 overall in the voting, all that kind of stuff. They've got weapons everywhere. But we've seen them, hold Oregon State to 0 points in the second half of that game. I think they scored 0 points in the second half and still found a way to win on defense. Big clutch throws from Michael Penix. Great run game with former Mississippi State running back, whose name, of course, is escaping me. But like
Dylan Johnson,
they get it done in several different ways throughout the year when it matters most. And I think that's something that we probably don't give Washington enough credit for.
If you're betting Washington, or if you're just a believer in the Huskies and you think Team of Destiny type vibes, I would still probably hedge a little bit and take the 4.5, because there's some history that would suggest that Washington could be in a tough spot as it relates to roster talent in the playoff era. So since 247 Sports Talent Composite Rankings began in 2015, the more talented team in terms of roster talent is 13-3 in semifinal games. This year's semifinal rankings in terms of the talent composite, number 26 Washington, number 6 Texas, and then you've got number 1 Alabama against number 14 Michigan. I think people will be surprised that Michigan is outside of the top 10. Also worth noting, with the TCU comp, TCU was one of those 3 lesser talented teams that won a semifinal game. But worth noting as well that teams outside the top 10 in roster talent are 2-10 in playoff games. And both of those wins came against teams that were also outside of the top 10 in roster talent. With TCU, Michigan last year, Michigan was outside the top 10 in roster talent. And then when Clemson beat Oklahoma in the semifinal 2015, both of those teams were outside of the top 10 in terms of roster talent. And just in case you're getting real aggressive and you think Washington winning a college football playoff national championship. That's kind of what I'm listening to this, hoping that you're going to give me something pushing me in that direction. This will not push you in that direction. No team outside the top 10 has won the college football playoff. Michigan, Washington, in terms of roster talent, those are the two teams in this field that are outside of the top 10. It's changing with the transfer portal and the reliance of that. And Florida State might have been able to buck some of those trends. They entered the year between TCU and Nebraska in those rankings, which is just really interesting. But does that factor into any decisions that you have as you approach this game and just trying to pick a winner, trying to pick a side and figure out what's the better play here?
No, I think honestly, this is one of those games where I think that if you both teams are really good. I think this is the first time looking at a playoff, and maybe I'll be completely wrong about this because the way the semifinals have played out so far throughout like the previous 9 years, it seems is more often than not, there's a blowout in the semifinals or maybe in both. And I don't think we're going to get that this year. I think this is the most evenly matched 4 teams we've ever seen in the playoff. I just from what I look at, and I think that there's not somebody that's like, that meme of the dragon head where it's like there's 2 normal looking dragons and like the one with his tongue out like looks like an idiot. There's not a situation like that. There's no Cincinnati like 2021. There's no like Washington from 2016 who was also an underrated team. I think that this is a game where when I look at like you really dig into the numbers and you dig into like tape and watch the two teams, like it feels like the more knowledgeable you are about the team, the more confident you'd be in it and what's going to take, who's going to win and what's going to take to win this game. Washington, everyone, I think like the casual fan, as Josh Pate puts it, Washington, Texas can be high scoring, probably not going to be any defense. These two teams are going to do this and that, blah, blah, blah. Both teams can play defense really well. What's interesting, I think, about Texas is like if you look at where people think that they're going to be exploited by Washington's offense and what Washington does in that offense with Caleb DeBoer and the offensive coordinator is they throw the ball on average of like 63% of the time going into this season, right? Like it is a pretty massive disparity between their pass and run plays. Not as much this year, but that has been like their calling card in the past. Texas is 94th in the country in pass yards per game allowed, right? They're also 30th in yards per attempt allowed. Like there's like you have to dig through the numbers to really find like a weakness. I think for either
efficiency is more important. Yeah,
right, exactly. And I do think the talent. I think that there's comparable talent on both sides, especially from the starting standpoint. Like I think Texas obviously has more talent and probably more depth there, but I also think there's a lot to be said for when you talk about a coach being in big moments. We don't think about that with Caleb DeBoer as much. But like that dude's a winner. He's just won everywhere he's gone. Like everywhere he's been, they've won. You can't really say the same for Steve Sarkisian except for in a couple outlier years.
A few things. Caleb DeBoer at my alma mater, Indiana, which I am repping today. Shout out home field. Shout out my guy, Will Ogburn, my co-host, Saturday Down South podcast, who got me this sweatshirt last year, something I love very much. There is a certain feeling of, well, if this coach hasn't been there before, how can you really bet on them to win a national championship? The stat that would buck that is there has been one coach who has won a national championship in the playoff era in his first appearance in the playoff. Do you know who that coach is?
Ed Orgeron.
Exactly. So it's kind of
tough. And purple and yellow, purple and gold colors.
Exactly. It's kind of tough to necessarily say that. And I truly think that what Sark did for that 2020 Alabama team in the national championship and the way that he schemed open Devontae Smith, who had 12 catches for 214 or 215 yards and 3 touchdowns in the first half of that game. Yeah. You've got Tough Borland somehow lined up against him. Like that's how
I feel about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, goodness gracious. The mismatch of the century. Like the way that he showed up for a big time game like that with total autonomy on that side of the ball and schemed guys open, to me, that sort of should put to bed the notion of like, oh, well, what's he going to do on this stage? He's only ever coached in a Holiday Bowl or an Alamo Bowl.
Right.
So to me, I would almost put that aside and wouldn't necessarily say that's going to be make or break for him. If Texas loses, it's not going to be because, oh, well, Sark, he just doesn't have that big game experience. Being an Alabama offensive coordinator has got to be as pressure packed of an assistant job as there is in the sport. Question: I meant to ask you this earlier. Did you omit Ryan Grubb's name, the Washington offensive coordinator, because he turned down Bama?
No, but here's the thing. Let me finally get this off my chest because I haven't had a platform to say it on in it like maybe ever. Of course he turned down the Bama job. Like people use that as like, oh man, like that's not good for Alabama. No, like if you're that guy and you're saying like I'm gonna go be under like just the smallest microscope possible, I'm gonna be under scrutiny from all the fans no matter what. Coming off a season where they had top 10 offense under Bill O'Brien and the fans hated him from day one. Then you get to go back with one of the most veteran rosters in the country. Listen, shut up, Connor. I'm not doing this to you today. No, I honestly just forgot his name. I think he's a tremendous offensive coordinator. I will say, going back to the Texas part of it, this is a game I've kind of flip flopped on like throughout, like some like looking at picks and on radio this morning. I think I said Washington. Looking at some of the stuff now, I think like what's scary about with Sark and what you mentioned, and Sark again, best offensive mind in football in my opinion. You brought up the Devontae Smith thing. Devontae Smith had one of the probably the most remarkable season for a receiver maybe ever besides Larry Fitzgerald. And he won the Heisman, all that kind of stuff. That game, what's astounding about that game is that Jalen Waddle was like coming back from a broken leg or broken ankle and not even remotely close to being the same person. I know they had Najee Harris, but Devontae Smith at times seemed like he was the offense. Like they had a lot of talent there. What he's got to work with this year with Texas. And what's so scary about Texas, and you saw it in the Alabama game, right? You've got Jordan Whittington, when he wants to show up, a former 5-star. I think he had 5 catches for 73 yards against Bama. Jatavian Sanders, one of the most like underrated, overlooked tight ends in the country. That guy is dangerous. And then again, A.D. Mitchell in big time games.
Yep.
My gosh. And then, oh, by the way, the bell cow and like the prize guy of all the receivers there, Xavier Worthy, who can hurt you in so many different facets. And I'm not even getting into the run game. That's what worries me about having to defend all of that on the field at the same time.
That is one of the reasons why Texas checks the most boxes of any of the remaining playoff teams of a national champ. And that doesn't mean Texas is going to win it all. It just means if you're looking at the profile and you're looking at the history of this system, wherein we are now asking teams to win 14 games, 13 or 14 games, depending on who you are, and win a national championship in the 14 playoff era, there are certain boxes that you look for a team to check. And having those pass catchers that are picked in the first 2 rounds, you go back, you look at every one of those national champs, that's what they have. And even Georgia 2021, like, all right, well, they still have Brock Bowers, freshman Brock Bowers, who was still playing at an absurd level. George Pickens was active, although not the full version of George Pickens. And oh, by the way, A.D. Mitchell, who's being mocked in all of these. So like that was a team that I was kind of like, oh, maybe they won't have like those future first round type guys. Like even 2018 Clemson, Mike Williams. I mean, like we're still talking about. We don't need to talk too much more about 2018 Clemson. But like those are one of those things, and Texas has that, being able to be that good against the run, averaging what they do from an offensive standpoint. You got to average at least 35 points per game in the playoff era. It says to win a national championship, and it's more about the efficiency in all of those areas. So you look at it on paper, and I would say Texas gives you that best chance to be able to win a national championship based on those checking those boxes. But there is a chaos scenario, a doomsday scenario as it relates to gambling that we have to talk about. And it's really, really interesting. I'm curious if you know where I'm going with this.
I do not.
The doomsday scenario for a live bet on this game. If Quinn Ewers goes down.
Oh, my God.
If he suffers an injury, Malik Murphy hit the portal. He's off to Duke. The backup quarterback for Texas who filled in admirably. And if Texas does win a national championship, give that guy a ring. He absolutely deserves it. And don't give me this crap about, oh, we opted out. He had to hit the portal. That's what you have to do if you're in his spot. Don't blame the kid whatsoever. We would have Arch Manning trying to lead Texas to a national championship. And Arch, for all the things that have been said and written about him, has completed 2 passes at the collegiate level. Okay. I would be so intrigued by what the odds makers do with a live line, knowing how decorated Arch is, knowing how many people will probably want to like, oh my God, I could bet Texas, Texas money line live or something like that. And knowing that at the same time, Arch is not Malik Murphy in terms of experience and
No.
based on the limited sample size that we've seen so far. How would you, Chris Marler, treat that if all of a
Oh
sudden
my God.
Quinn Ewers
I
gets a
would put
Dallas Turner
so
hit
much
and goes down?
money. I would put all the money on Washington. This is Quinn Ewers' team, right? And we saw them struggle. Listen, what Malik Murphy was in for, I think it was part of BYU, correct?
I think Iowa State as well.
Iowa State, TCU, I think, or maybe not. He wasn't in Iowa State, but it was BYU, Kansas State, and TCU. They did fine in those games. The BYU game is the outlier because it's 35-6. But they had like multiple goal line stands. I think they had a punt return for a touchdown. That one, I think it's the one where Worthy got. But Kansas State 3-point win, TCU 3-point win. Those were at least their closer games that they played, right? If this is a "what have you done for me lately" type thing, and I know how decorated Arch is. I think that a lot of that is because of that last name, and that's all I'll say about that. And we're not going to sit here and go about a spring game and be like, "Oh my God, Arch sucks because he couldn't do this in practice." But there's a reason why Arch Manning, who is one of the highest ranked recruits in the history of recruiting, is your third string quarterback for a majority of the year, especially in this day and age of NIL, where it's like you might want to make sure you hang, or in the transfer portal, you might want to hang on to that guy and elevate him to the number 2 just to be on the safe side. I don't want that to happen. The last thing we want to see as college football fans is Quinn Ewers go down, but that is a nightmare scenario. And that is if you are somebody like me, like in the past at least, when you're not as if you're just super gung ho about a certain team and you've got a bunch of your money on one side of it, that is a nightmare scenario. You're right about finding yourself like that. That would be the worst case scenario, unless Jalen Miller went out.
We wouldn't get a world in which Vegas would take certain Quinn Ewers props off the table if that were to happen. No, they would leave all
in
those
the game.
on the table. Yeah,
they would. I mean, they would. You just lose your money.
So let's say you're like, all right, I'm taking the over on Quinn Ewers passing yards, taking the over on Quinn Ewers passing touchdown, something like that. He goes down in the middle of the first quarter of this game.
You just lose that bet.
You just lose. That's just a loss. That sucks.
It's definitely happened to me before.
Yeah. Okay. Fingers crossed that doesn't happen.
No.
Hopefully both these quarterbacks, because it is a great quarterback matchup, and seeing these two guys who have had very different career trajectories, both of whom started in the Big Ten. People forget that playing on this stage. It should be great theater, and it should be a fun semifinal matchup. I have a confidence pool thought that relates to just the playoff and the national championship. Make the 2 playoff games and the title game as close as you possibly can to your 3 biggest games if you are doing a confidence pool. Okay. Why? Why would you? Aren't these going to be great games that we have small spreads? Doesn't that kind of goes against what we usually do in confidence pools? Chances are, if you're in a confidence pool, you're not in first place. It's just probably not. And you're probably going to want to have those points to be able to pick an underdog and make up the difference against the first place team, right? If it's just going to come down to that, and you're like, all right, he's going to pick one team, I'm going to pick the other. He or she could be a woman at the top of your confidence pool. Don't mean
they won the SCS pod 2 years ago.
Exactly. So you know what? There's probably a woman at the top of your confidence pool.
Yeah.
Make no mistake about it. But even if you are in first place, having these points at your disposal puts you in the power position, right? Because you get to say, okay, well, yeah, I think that Texas is going to win this game. I'm just going to pick Texas and hope for the best. And I'm not going to have anybody that's going to be able to make up ground on me by doing that. And I'm just going to pick the team that I have most confidence in. But I realize that there are exceptions to this. Maybe something like Georgia beating Florida State is a game that you want to have 40 confidence points on or something like that. You want to put that in the top. Oregon, Liberty, maybe that's another one where you're like, God, I need to put as many as humanly possible on that. But outside of that, make sure that these final 3 games, the 2 playoff games and the national championship, are high 30s, low 40s type games in confidence pools. Also, it feels like this year we're going to have a lot of people with their highest confidence points on the winner of the Michigan-Bama game to win the national championship. You do that because if you did that for Texas-Washington, but Washington pulls off the upset as a 4.5-point dog, you're like, crap, now I've got to go with Washington to win the national championship. So, and you don't really have a choice with that. So Just something to keep in mind if you're trying to figure this out. You're trying to set yourself up, going into this home stretch of bowl season.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Any props that stand out? Any betting strategies that we should take into this one before we move on to the Rose Bowl?
So no, and we'll do a prediction, right? I think Texas first team to score. I love that.
Yep.
First team to score, they are minus 125. Getting Texas for the first, listen, Sark on script. Sark on script. You've heard me say it a bazillion times. Listen to Saturday Football Uncensored. He's just one of the best. And I know that Washington's good as well. I just feel like that we are overlooking how good that defense is for Texas. When you look at some of these numbers, they're top 25 in yards per game allowed. They're top 15 in scoring defense. They're 13th, actually. Third in the country in rush yards per game allowed. Fifth, like you said, in rush yards per carry. They're eighth in interceptions as well. So I think that two of the things that I would look for, I love Texas to score first because, like I said, Sark on script. I do like Texas to win the game. I would probably take the money line, even though it's a 4-point spread right now, and the juice is actually on Washington to cover that. And the only other one I can think of, this is kind of, I feel bad for even saying this. This kind of feels lame, but Michael Penix over a half interception. So he'll throw one interception in the game, strictly because I just feel like this Texas defense is going to get after him. I think maybe the biggest matchup, we haven't even touched on it, Connor, is that Texas D-line going up against Washington's O-line and getting pressure on the quarterback. One of the reasons why they were so dominant in that win against Alabama, they gave up 0 sacks to two edge rushers that led the country in in pressures with Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner. 0 sacks allowed in that game. They got 5 sacks on their defensive lines, and they barely ever brought a blitz. It was just beating them up front. The Joe Moore Award winners from Washington, I wonder how that's going to look like. They're going to try to get the ball out early, I'm sure. There's so many great matchups here. I do like Texas to win. Like I said, my favorite bet would be the money line, Texas score first, and if you're looking for maybe a flyer, take Penix over an interception.
Is there an A.D. Mitchell touchdown prop in this one?
That's such a good one, dude. That is such a good one. Player to score the first touchdown for Texas, he has the best odds. Plus 275. So this is actually really good. Let me look real quick. They have rushing props, receiving props. I don't see his receiving props up yet, so I'm sure those will be coming soon. But yeah, I think that's a really, really good spot for them. I think there's gonna be more that'll come out from Texas because you still actually don't even have some of the props that would be up for Jonathan Brooks as well. But I do like that for him to score anytime touchdown score. We've seen those as well. I think that's a good one.
And if you're a Georgia fan that's just watching this game angrily, just emotionally hedge and just bet on A.D. Mitchell to score a touchdown in this game. Maybe not the total yardage. That hasn't been necessarily been his thing throughout his career. But when it's playoff time, he's ready to go. There's no doubt about it. All right, Rose Bowl. Or do I have to? Oh, I got to give a prediction. I'm taking Texas to win. You know that I'm taking Texas to win. I think it's going to be Texas 35-21. So Texas covers as well against Washington. Hey, sports fans, we've got an exciting offer exclusively for new users of ESPN Bet. When you join, be sure to enter the promo code SOUTH during sign up to unlock an additional $50 in your betting account. That's right. You can wager on your favorite sports and receive up to $250 in bonus bets when you use the promo code SOUTH. Please remember, you must be 21 years old to participate in sports betting. We encourage responsible gambling within your means. If you ever need assistance or support, please reach out to 1-800-522-4700. Join the action today and make the most of this fantastic offer.